Good morning, class. Mr. Anderson here, joining you from outside to talk a little bit about photography. You had this lesson with Mrs. Sweeney already, and I just want to show you some opportunities or ways that I was able to see this in nature and hopefully inspire you to find similar ways in a park or woods near you. Today I went to Purgatory Park, which is just a couple miles from my house. It's in Eden Prairie, but literally 2 miles from our school. So I think that would be a beautiful place to go and take some pictures if you haven't done that yet. The three rules that I wrote down from Mrs. Sweeney's lesson on photography was one, leading lines. Find lines within nature, natural lines that point to something, or at least just lead your viewer on a path throughout your picture. So they're not just looking at it all at once, but that this line gives them multiple things to look at, a path of looking at it. Second, she mentioned, well, I'm doing these out of order. The second, one of the other rules that she mentioned was rule of thirds. So she said, imagine there's a grid of 3 by 3 on your camera. Don't put the most interesting object smack dab in the center. Actually try to move around your grid a little bit so that what you're trying to capture is more in a corner or a side. That will actually make your picture look better. That's not intuitive. And by intuitive, I mean that's not something that you would have just guessed. You probably need to learn that skill of moving it around a little bit. But when you start practicing that, it makes sense. Now, the one, ironically, that I have up right now is I've kind of centered that interesting part. So you could critique me on that. Um, the last thing that we mentioned in the video was finding a unique perspective and a unique texture. So find something that looks a little different maybe, or is is fascinating to look at. And then don't just capture that straight on, but try to find an interesting perspective that you could capture whatever it is about that object that you think is intriguing. So I'm going to go full screen now. I think you'll still be able to see my face, but it's just about the pictures today. Here we go, slideshow. Sorry for the wind. Nature shots at Purgatory Park with Mr. Anderson. Wasn't a very sunny day today, but that doesn't make a huge difference in photography. Okay, here's a log that I found was interesting. Notice how your eye immediately goes to the little knot in the center. There it is. And maybe you didn't even see that this was a log at the beginning because it's so decomposed. It's decaying into the ground. Even though it was once a mighty tree, now it's just a mossy log. I thought that was fascinating to look at. And also it's a bit of a line you can see going across from right to left. Here's two more experiments with leading lines, according to Mrs. Sweeney. And how this one on the left is kind of an S shaped, right? So your eye follows that path down to the horizon, and then there's that beautiful tree that it leads to, that pine tree that's just so kind of soft looking, but also standing straight and pointing towards the sky. I love how the lines work together in that one. On the right, what I like, here you have another line, but also what I like about this is the texture. Remember, that was the third part that we talked about. And how if you look at the texture in that water, it's almost stony like, or glassy like, but it's still reflective of the rest of the plants. I love that. Here we go, moving on. Here's an interesting perspective that I was trying to find. I don't know if I succeeded. What do you think? Let me know. But I had it right by the trunk of the tree, pointing up to the sky, like, as Mrs. Sweeney called it, a worm's eye view, admiring the leaves all at the top. If you haven't just looked up when you're in a forest in a while, I recommend doing that because it's a fresh perspective on something you've often walked through. Don't just stare at the ground when you go hiking. That's the worst part. Couple more practice with lines again, line going to the horizon. That one's not that exciting. What I was trying to do was to get this arch over here, because see how the tree is arching over over the path. And if the colors were a little bit easier to spot, you could see that there are flowers on that branch that goes right over your head as well, which would have been neat, maybe later on this season. And then I have some wildflowers, very purpley, right by the trunk of a tree. This is one of my favorite shots. I think there's what we were practicing here is the rule of thirds, where I wanted you to notice that trunk, but I didn't put it in the center of the shot, right? I put it in the foreground, in the bottom left corner, but your eye will notice it, and then it contrasts with the rest of the picture. And what I love about the backdrop there is the different shades of green and the very, very kind of grainy texture of those plants in the background. And we're almost done, but here's some more wildflowers. Wildflowers, you have to get nice and low and really close to see their unique texture because there's infinite different types of textures of wildflowers. It's beautiful. And I like how in the background of that flower picture on your left, it gets a little blurry. So then you focus, of course, more on the flowers itself. And here's our last set of photos. We have some blooming white flowers on the tree to the right, and then again practice with this S-shape curve that leads the viewer's eyes to different places in the picture. Perhaps you start in the left, then you hop to the right, then you go back to the left. So that adds some interest to your audience as they're looking at your photograph. Hope that helps applying Mrs. Sweeney's rules of photography. This should be a doable project for you and hopefully very enjoyable. This is your chance to your excuse to say, Mom, Dad, bring me to the park. Mr. A said I needed to go do my homework, right? So after you get those pictures, you're going to have to select one to write your poem on, and that will be tomorrow's lesson. I will say, okay, now that we've picked a photograph, how do you start to imagine or brainstorm or be creative about how this picture could contain a poem? And of course, the first lesson will be that it's a starting point for a poem. The poem isn't in there already. You have to supply that with what you bring to the picture. So nice short lesson today. I'll keep it under 8 minutes and hope you're having a beautiful Monday morning as you watch this and that you can enjoy taking some pics. All right. See you guys later.